Welcome back to the studio. As you can see in the opening intro, I did a little bit of redecorating, and that was just to coincide with this little series of videos. I'm going to be calling these either 2 or 3 videos Vintage Elements. And the purpose for that is, of course, it's for Urban Elements. We're going to be using Urban Elements designs on the quilt. But the quilt that I'm going to be quilting today and over the next week or so, however long it takes me, is a vintage quilt. And this particular kind of quilt is my absolute favorite. I don't even know how you would categorize it other than a red and green quilt. I've heard some different stories about where this particular design combination comes from, and what I remember was that it came over with German immigrants to the United States, and it had something to do with their history. Perhaps I should know more because it's one of my favorites, but this is what I've heard. I also really love the combination of red and green. Red, green, and gold are a real particular favorite of mine. Part of it, I believe, is because red and green symbolize Christmas, and when you throw in the gold, it's kind of like a vintage Christmas. So red, green, and gold is my favorite color combination, and these quilts combine both piecing and applique, so that's another favorite of mine I really like. None of the quilts that I own are in particularly mint condition. I've never been one to be real finicky about things. Sometimes I collect Roseville pottery. If it has a little chip in it, that doesn't bother me so much. My family didn't grow up with all pristine things in the house. There were 4 boys in the house, so almost nothing was left untouched as we were growing up. So these quilts have some flaws in them. This particular one I got when I went to LA for my niece's wedding, and it's got a couple stains in it. You can see there's some wear on it, but somewhere on the quilt it actually has an embroidered initials RWG 1914. So this quilt is a lot older than I am, and I hope I'm in at least this good a shape when I'm that old. Some of the pieces that I have are just blocks, because I've been collecting some blocks, hoping that one day I can assemble my own little scrappy quilt using the red and green. I also have 2 border strips that I recently picked up. And then some of the pieces like this, sadly, were quilts that somebody cut up. And I've just bought these little pieces, but I really love that chrome green, and I believe that was the name of that was chrome green and chrome red, but I could be mistaken about that as well. This particular quilt is what we're going to be working on. As you can see, it has a nice large feathered star. There's a little applique of sort of a spinning pinwheel, probably not exactly a pinwheel. And then we have some more applique in the border, and I'm not sure, I don't remember if that's on all 4 sides. I think it is. Excuse me. This quilt also has some age stains in it, which I'm not going to attempt to alter. Before I get it on the quilt, on the frame, there's a couple places that I'm going to hand applique some of the stitches back in place. Now, this entire quilt was hand pieced, and it was hand appliqued, so I'm going to do my best to preserve that. Traditionally, these would have been hand quilted. I don't have the time to hand quilt a quilt, even a small one. I certainly don't have time to quilt this large one, and I can't afford to have it quilted. Hand quilting is something that I know people are still doing, but it's not as prevalent as it was in the past, and hiring someone to quilt something this size could easily be $800 to $1,000. So that's not going to happen. So we're going to be working with blocks today instead of a panto. We're not going to do an edge to edge over the whole thing. In this feathered star, I'm going to try and download 2 different patterns that are star quilting designs, and I'm going to mark on the quilt when I get them loaded onto the IQ and have those stitch out in the star. I'm going to be doing another different type of feather in the white block, some kind of outline on the applique block, and to be perfectly honest, I'm not even sure what I'm going to be doing on the border yet. There is this section here which is a half square triangle, and I'll probably just be using half of whatever the block is that I use here. I may just applique around the feathers, stitch around the feathers, do a little echo stitching, and see how much more I need to do. But that is the plan. After I get this stitched, I'm going to do a little bit of ironing on it and get it onto the frame. But I do want to discuss what I did on the frame, because I took an extra step before I load this onto the frame, just because this is vintage, it's fragile, and so I'm adding an additional layer just to help preserve the integrity of this vintage quilt top. I don't know where the quilt top came from. I don't know who created it. I purchased it online, and the seller didn't have any history on the particular quilt. They probably picked it up for a fraction of the cost on a garage sale. But I'm going to go ahead and show you what I did on the frame, and then we'll get working on the computer first to show you the designs I'm selecting. And I'm going to be getting more than what I need, because I don't know exactly how they're going to play out yet. But we'll do that step, and then we'll get to loading this onto the frame and start stitching. As you can see, I already have the backing fabric loaded onto the quilt frame just as I normally would. I always mark a line at the top of my backing fabric, 2.5 inches down. I mark the center mark on there, and I make a line all the way across the top. And whether I do this on or off the machine depends on the size of the quilt. Then I'll lay the batting with the top edge right on top of that line that I've drawn, and I'll baste it into place. The backing fabric is on the take-up bar and on the backing bar. The batting is floating. It just goes down in between the rails. And in this case, I've added an additional layer. It has a Kona Snow White 108-inch fabric on it. So this is a complete quilt sandwich. The backing, batting, and the top. I also have the top on the lower bar, and it is under tension. Now at this point I'm out of bars. So when I baste the vintage top onto this already completed quilt sandwich, I will use the same line at the top of the fabric and baste that into place. But the rest of the top is going to float as I work down the quilt, and mostly it's going to float because I don't have any place to fasten it to. I would not try and fasten it to the top before I put it on, because there'd be no way to keep it flat and straight. Secondly, this quilt is old. It was hand pieced, and I already know that the squares of the stars, the center square, are different sizes. Some of them are 9 inches, some of them are 9 3/4 inches. So there's going to be a little bit of wonkiness in the quilt. So I'm going to have that float, but everything else is under tension, because I don't need 5 different things floating and worry about all those layers as I work through the quilt. The reason I have this Kona fabric on the top, which will be underneath the vintage top, is to give more support to the vintage top. And if at any point there's a little hole that might come in one of the hand piecing seams, I will have white fabric underneath it so that the batting isn't exposed, and it also gives a nice sturdy foundation to the vintage top. So I went ahead, I'm very happy to do that, spend the extra money on that extra layer of fabric. I think it'll also brighten up the quilt a little bit because you have all this white shining through. The backing fabric is also white because all of the other quilts that I have bought, all of the old ones, always have a white muslin backing. This time period they did not use or have printed fabric that they could use on the back. It would have been too expensive. White muslin was always the go-to. So I'm staying traditional in that sense. I'm not hand quilting it because I don't have the time or the money, but I am respecting as much as I can the quilt top itself. I'm also going to be using a type of quilting design that I think would have been used, kind of a feather look on the quilt. And I still haven't decided on my thread. I am either going to use cotton or isocord. I have been using isocord almost exclusively with the Bernina. When I switched over from HandyQuilter to Bernina, I noticed that the cotton was creating a lot of lint in the bobbin area, and so I've slowly stopped using cotton and stayed exclusively with the isocord. So I'm going to make that decision when I get the top loaded, but we'll go ahead and get in progress. Here's a little example of a little hole that I have in the quilt. So I'm just going to take some red thread, I have it on a needle, and here's an open seam here as well. I'm just going to applique that shut. I could go in the back and do it from the back, but I applique so much I feel fairly confident doing that. So it's just a kind of a slow process, and I think I grabbed an embroidery needle by mistake when I was in my haste to bring this out of my sewing room. I could have done this on the machine, but I kind of quite like doing a little bit of handwork. I'm going to be putting the little cup foot on the Bernina so that anywhere there's these little puckers, it won't catch with the foot. And I'm pretty sure that I could spend probably a week going over this quilt piece by piece, checking for all the little holes, but time marches on. I've got to get things done. So I'm just pulling this together a little bit. All of the quilting that we'll be putting on this will help hold it in place. And I may also be doing some ruler work to stabilize the blocks before I start quilting. And again, I won't know that until I get it loaded on the frame. But anything that I do with the ruler work is going to be meant to be purely structural. It's not going to be visual. I'm not going to try and show that with a high contrast thread. So I'm going to tackle this next little piece. After I got my little knot in there, I'll just close this seam up. We used to have a debate when I worked at the quilt store about how people use old quilts. Some people believe that you should preserve the integrity of your quilt even if it's falling apart. You shouldn't be allowed to alter it. I know some people have made teddy bears or pillows out of usable parts of a quilt by cutting up the quilt. And there's, you know, a fair bit of opinion about that. But I think each generation has the right to make their stamp. So while I am not going to hand quilt this the way it traditionally might have been, I am going to try and preserve the integrity of the quilt as much as possible. And I have a couple more stitches, and then we will I can do the rest of these little fix-ups while you're watching me download quilting designs. I could be quilting in the background, you won't even know it. Stitching, appliquing. Okay, so that's all I'm going to show here, and I don't even know if that's on camera, but we'll go ahead and continue on. Next, we're going to be moving inside so I can download some images. And I'll see you in a minute. Record. We are at the home page of the Elementz website. I have logged into my computer, and I am going to go to Design Wall. And I've already hit browse and loaded something from my library file folder. Now I'm going to upload the image. You'll probably recognize this as a close-up of, well, it didn't go through. So I'm going to do it again. Select this close-up, upload image. And you can see it's a close-up of the vintage top that we're going to be using. And I am going to be bringing in a couple different designs to look at in the star. I'm not going to be absolutely convinced they work until I actually get them loaded on the IQ, but this is what we're going to start with. So I know the name of the collection is Twirly Girl. So I'm going to type that in the search engine, and we're going to wait for those to pop up. You can see we have a pinwheel block that might work and an 8-pointed star. So right from the search engine here, I'm going to go ahead and hit D for the pinwheel, and I'm going to go back and do the same thing again. And I'm going to pull in the 8-pointed star. I'm going to select the D for Design Wall. And now we have these two designs that we could play with. Did I? No, they're different. I had to look for a second. So I'm going to add to canvas one of them. And I'm going to add this one to canvas. And I'm going to see if I can get these to fit once I load the block onto the IntelliQuilter and tell the IntelliQuilter what the size of the block is. I'm going to see how these play out. If these don't work today, I'll continue looking, but I could go ahead and select another thing from that Twirly Girl collection. I could add this to the design wall. Add to canvas. So you can see how I can at least get this one done, and also on this one here I have a thought for something that would border the whole block but not sew over the applique. So I'm going to go ahead and load these three things onto my USB stick so I can get them out to the IQ. I've already purchased these items, so I can go ahead and download them. I have my 8-pointed star, and it's downloaded here to the lower left. And what was the name of that? Block number 4 is what I want. So let's see, block number 4, we'll download that one. And which was the first one? 8-pointed star we've done, and I believe it's the pinwheel block. So we'll go ahead and I can open these one at a time. This is all the different file formats for one particular design. You can see all the different machine formats on here. The one that I'll be using is IQ, but I'm going to go ahead and extract all of them. The computer's extracting those for me. It's going to open up a new file box, and then I can go down to the IQ file here. I can highlight that and right click so I can bring up my option to copy it. And at this point I'm going to insert my USB stick in the computer. You can see here in the Transcend is the name of my USB stick, and I'm going to right click on blocks, and I'm going to paste that design onto the block. If I click on block, you can see now that the design is in there. So I'm going to repeat this process for the other designs that I've downloaded. That was the 8-pointed star, so I'm going to do the block number 4, extract all, I'm going to look for my IQ design, highlight it, right click, copy, and paste. And then finally my pinwheel block, extract all, select my IQ, I'm going to copy and paste it into blocks. So now I have all three of my designs on my USB stick. I'm going to rename these because I like to eliminate the Urban Elements code, and I also like to have the height of the block if there's information regarding that. Okay, it says here recommended height is 5 inches or larger. So I'm going to add 5 there. The pinwheel block, the pinwheel block is 12 inches or larger, so I'm going to rename that one, highlight the Urban Elements inventory code, eliminate that. And we'll add 12 inches to that one. And then we'll do the same for what was the last 8-pointed star. I misspelled 8. Well, you can see all the different star options here, but we did get there. And that's also 12 inches. So rename the last one. Eliminate the inventory code by deleting it. And add 12. The reason I do this is because when I open up a design on the computer, I want to know how much play I have with it. I don't want to put a whole cloth quilt block, which could be 60 inches, into a 5-inch block. Thered be no way it would stitch out. So it just gives me a reference point on what size the designs are when I open up in the IQ system, because I wouldn't know that since I didn't design it. And also I don't need all the inventory number because these are alphanumeric. They'll come up alphabetically on the IQ. So if I eliminate the code, inventory code, all of these will come up as T for Twirly Girl, and that's exactly how I want it. So I can go ahead and now safely eject in the bottom right hand corner. I'm going to eject the software, and it will tell me that it's safe to remove hardware, so I'm going to go ahead and take that out, and we'll get back out to the IQ. Okay, I'm at the IQ. I'm engaging my motors, and I'm going to hit Load, Design, Synchronize. And I want to load. It's going to ask me to install my USB stick, so I'm removing the tablet from the holder, inserting the USB stick into the slot. It's going to say waiting for USB drive, copying a pattern, and at the bottom it says file transfer complete, so I can go ahead and remove the USB stick, get it back onto the tablet and lock it in place, and I can hit the back button, and now we're going to work on Design Sew Quilt. I'm going to go ahead and mark in the parameters of this star block, and I'm not going to be including in my measurement these little feathered half square triangle units. I'm just going to be doing where it's solid red. So I'm going to work on Design Sew Quilt, Start New. I'm starting over, and I already know because I've practiced that the first design I'm going to show you doesn't work, but I want to show you how I got there. So I chose a block design because we're just going to work on a block at a time rather than an edge to edge. And we're going to mark on quilt. So what this is going to do, I'm going to put the needle of the machine at different parts of the block, and I'm going to hit OK. And you're going to see as I start moving to the next section that we're going to get a design created on the screen. Basically, I'm going to all of the end of the red points. you can see the beginnings of a star being created up on the screen. I'm not going to be super accurate with this because I know that we're going to be erasing this because this design did not work. And now I can go ahead and hit close block and it will go ahead and create the star. So I'm going to hit finished and I'm going to choose the pinwheel block. And now I need to try and increase the size of it. So I'm going to hit the width and the height. And I'm going to hit rotation and try and get this to rotate. You can see that no matter what I do, this design is not working in the star that I have. I don't know how to do too much more to it at this point. I can just see that no matter what I am trying, it isn't going to work. So I'm going to go ahead and hit finished and then back. And we're back to the screen again. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat the process for designing a quilt. And we're going to do the block and mark on the quilt. So we're just repeating this. This one I'm going to be maybe a little bit more accurate because this is going to work as far as I know. They have a little clicker. Actually, I have the little clicker that I could click without touching the screen. I just haven't installed it yet. There's only so many things I can learn at a time. And now I'll go ahead and close block. So you can see my star block on here. I'm going to hit finished. And this time I'm going to select a different star pattern. And I think you can see already that this particular one is going to fit in there much better. So I'm going to adjust the height a little, well actually the width first. I'm going to go back and forth between the width and the height, making the pattern fit in as close as I can. And I'm just going to keep playing with this until I feel like I've got it as close as I can. Now you can see it overlaps some of the star points that I've created, and I am not real worried about that because I have done just the solid red. There is still more red in the star points, so some of the feathers will be going out into that portion of the design, but I'm okay with that. I'm going to play with this just another few seconds before I click the finish button, and we'll bring you in and show you what the actual design looks like as a stitching. This is the exact line that I have stitched out. So right here I've made the design, but you can see the red extends a little bit beyond that. And on the screen you can see my design of the outline of the star, and you can see the quilting design, and it's overlapping a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust that again, getting it as close as I can to the inside of that. I think a little bit away is better than a little bit overlapping, but I'm going to be redoing this on every single star because every star is a slightly different measurement. So I'll get the chance to make some that are better or worse, and I'm okay with that. Okay, I've got it adjusted as good as I think I can for the very first stitch out. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Sew Quilt and hit Panto Sequencing. This is the, and continue. Our start and end is going to be in the center. So it has moved to the center, and it's done one stitch to pull up the bobbin thread. And I'm not going to cut that until I get started. So I'm going to hit continue and start. And I had it on basting, so I'm going to go ahead and move it to main, or the manual again, which is what it's supposed to be. So I could go ahead and get this restarted back at the beginning after I pull these basting stitches out. Restart. I'm going to go back to my start position. At least I know which way it's headed. And I have to rethread my needle. We'll see how much of this gets edited out. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit the OK button to get started. I'm going to have to go back and redo these first 2 rows. Well, it looks like 3 rows. I did switch to cotton thread. I heard my ancestors cry in my head, so I've switched to cotton thread in both the top and bottom. This is a King Tut red thread on the top, and I know that it'll be a little bit hard to see because I like low contrast thread options, but it's a really beautiful quilting feather, and I'll move you in closer so you can see that. We have one block quilted out. As I anticipated, there's going to be a few little puckers here and there because of the age of this block, this quilt. It was all hand pieced, And I already know that just measuring these center squares, some of them were 9 inches, some of them were 9 3/4. So I know there's going to be some variance, and I'm not going to beat myself up over that. So I did the digital quilting in the star, and then I just used the ruler to do a little bit of ruler work around the star. I'm going to go ahead and finish the whole quilt off before I decide if I'm going to come back and do ruler work in all of these feathers. I probably should, but time is always going to be a factor for me because of what I have to get done. So this is one block done. There are 20 star blocks on this quilt, so I've got 19 to go. I'm going to move on to the next one. I'm on to my third block. What I've been doing is just basting or using ruler work to sew around the star in the solid section the same way that I did on marking the quilt. I have this one marked already, and I have it at its beginning position, so I'm going to go ahead and hit start. And now I'm just going to lightly trim these threads. I don't like to trim them until after the machine started, because sometimes for me the stitches pull back out. So it says that we have 7.2 minutes, so approximately 7 minutes for each star. There are 20 blocks, so that is going to be about probably about 2 hours total just for the star blocks. But these are really beautiful feather pattern that we're stitching out, and I think it's going to look really good. There is going to be some slight variance from block to block, just because the sizes of the blocks are little variations, almost 3/4 of an inch on some of them, and they're not perfect stars either. This particular one was really lopsided up on the edge, but it's an old vintage piece, and I'm not expecting perfection on it. I really like the thread color that I've chosen. It's a King Tut thread, 100% cotton. There's also 100% cotton, kind of the snow white in the bobbin. I did check the bobbin tension, the bobbin face, when I switched from isocord to cotton, because there is a little bit of a difference. Just making sure that the tension was good, and it looks good on the top here. I don't see any of the white poking through. I'll know when I do my first roll up if I have any red poking through. I could get under the frame and look right now or use the mirror, but I didn't. So I'm just going to go ahead and let this keep sewing. The star block are the only ones that I'm going to be doing today on this video. On future videos I'll be doing this alternating white square, and then this particular block will have a frame around that. And once I do all of those components and carry it out to the edge, the only thing I'll have left to do is to decide what I want to do in the little spaces around the applique leaves. The leaves I will echo stitch with white on the background, and I might just carry the echo out until it bumps into each other to finish it off, but that'll be free motion work. So I'm just going to keep forging ahead on this, and I'll show you maybe something as the video closes out, but this otherwise will be just a continuation of me doing these individual blocks as I roll it up. As I've said, the actual top here is floating because I have a layer of cotton underneath the vintage top, just to help in case there's a hole in the quilt. I won't be getting batting showing through. So I'm going to keep going. I've been working on this for a couple days when I had time. It's a little bit colder today, so I have on a heavier shirt. One of the things that when I started, I was able to get basted all of the star points, the feather tips all the way around the star. But as the quilt is rolled up with the 2 layers of white cotton, the batting, and then the top, this take-up lever has gotten bigger and bigger. And as that increases in size, it's going to be hitting the back of the head of the machine. And what that means for me is that I can no longer go all the way around the star in one baste without moving the quilt. I can still do the interior, so the design will still fit, but that's just something to keep in mind when you are working on something that's getting close to the size of your whole design space. So I'm going to go ahead and I've already done some of the basting around the star, and I will freely admit that my ruler work is not the greatest. I have a little bit of a patience issue with that. But I'm on the last row. I'm going to go ahead and do these last 4 stars, and I'll show you another method of increasing the size of the design. The default came at one size, and I'm increasing them to fit the star, my star block, best that they can. I have my star drawn out. I used the tablet and the needle. I moved the machine around and did all the touch points, so you could see what the representation of this star block is on the software. And in the previous segment, I used the height and width button to make adjustment to the size of this pinwheel star that I'm using. This time I'm just going to do scale, and I'm just going to increase the scale all at once. So this is just another way of doing the same thing. And you can see on some of these little bits that the quilting design is overlapping the star. But remember, I still have the red feather tips that extend even beyond that line. This line of the star is where the solid red star is in the center, not the little half square triangles. So I can exceed it a little bit without it doing too much damage. So when I get it to about the size that I want without it going over too much, I'm just going to go ahead and hit finished. And sew quilt, we'll have to select what we're sewing, which is one whole star, and hit continue. I'm going to put my machine on manual before I forget. I'm going to hit sew quilt. It's going to move to the center, and it pulled up the bobbin thread for me. And as soon as I clip that, I can get started. I actually don't like to clip it until it gets started, because I can't tell yet which one of these feather plumes it's going to sew first, so I never know which direction it's going to shoot off. So I'll just go ahead and hit continue and let it start. This time it shot off to the right, so I can sneak in there and clip the threads, and now it's sewing. Now I only have 3 more after this to finish, and that will conclude the video for this week. In the next video, I'm going to be doing these alternate blocks of white, and I already have a block picked out for that. So the second video will be these, and then the third video will be going around this green little, I don't know if it's a pinwheel, but we're going to be doing a block around that pinwheel applique, and those will all be on cream thread. I've been having a little bit of an issue getting absolutely perfect tension. I've either got red showing on the back or white showing on the front. On the front, I'll probably just use a red Pigma pen and touch up some of those white dots. On the back, I'm not really concerned because I'm never going to use this on a bed. I'm going to put a sleeve on it so I can hang it up during the holiday season, and so the back won't really ever be seen. But even if it was on the bed, I don't think many people would see the back. But I'm going to keep going on this, and then we'll wrap up this week's video. I could hear somebody in my head saying, why didn't I do all of the star points, the feather points, when I was logging in the shape of the block? So, I mean, this had like 36, 100, about 160 star points on it, and it took a lot longer for me to get the formation of that star in there. And even some of them aren't perfect. But I went ahead and did it just to show you that it could be done. The IntelliQuilter can make that many points of a block. But I'm still going to go ahead and scale the same way that I did before. Only here I can actually see where the design is actually going to encroach onto the white. So I have a couple places here and here that it's going over, so I'll have to scale it back. And now that I have that finished, I can go ahead and hit finish just like I did before. Sew quilt, select the design, and sew quilt. It's going to move to the center just as it did before, and pull up the, I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread, hold those in place while it starts stitching. Clip my threads, and now I'm just going to let this final star stitch out. As you can see, I've got a little bit of puckering here in the bottom left-hand corner. It was really hard to get that side to stretch. This bottom band, I believe, is length of grain, and I think it was a little bit too short, so it's kind of stretched the bottom corner. But I'm just going to go ahead and do the binding the way that it sways down. This quilt top is probably 100 years old, so I'm not going to beat myself up over it, and I'm not going to get upset over it. I'm just going to go ahead and finish it the best that I can. Right now we're stitching the last star, and then we'll conclude for the week. I'm going to try and talk a little bit louder so I know the machine's running. I'm going to go ahead and let this block finish out. That'll conclude our first week of the vintage Elementz using modern quilting designs, digital quilting designs on a vintage quilt. So I will see you next time. Next time we're going to be doing these white alternate blocks or these little background blocks. We already have a block picked out for that. So until then, I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you soon.